The pot roast was still steaming when my father lifted his coffee mug like a gavel and said he had an announcement. The chandelier hummed softly above the oak table, washing everything in warm light, as if the room itself wanted to look kinder than it felt. My mother reached across the dishes to lace her fingers with my father's, a staged moment they'd practiced over decades of good news delivered to everyone but me. My sister cleared a space beside her plate for her phone, the screen glowing with a selfie she'd taken in my parents' hallway mirror. I tucked a loose strand of hair behind my ear and waited the way a well-trained dog waits for a command. Outside, a porch light buzzed against moths. Inside, the house smelled like butter and rosemary, and the kind of comfort I had always helped prepare but rarely received. "We're taking a family vacation," my father said, smiling at my mother like she was the prize he'd just won. 2 weeks in Hawaii. We've been saving. The word family landed like a coin rolled across a table, fast and shiny, and not meant for me. My chest warmed, then cooled. I took a breath that tasted like coffee and pot roast, and a hope I should have learned to starve. "When are we going?" I asked, already counting the days I could request off work, already picturing the three of us on a beach, sun on our shoulders, salt in our hair. Silence. My mother's smile trembled and settled. My father's eyes dropped to the coffee ring circling his mug. Amanda dragged a finger across her phone as if drawing a curtain. "Sweetheart," my mother said gently, "we couldn't afford tickets for everyone. Before I go on, tell me where you're listening from in the comments. And if you've ever been told there wasn't room for you at the table or in the plans, tap the like button and share this with someone who will understand. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss what happens next. But to understand how that dinner changed everything, you need to know where the ground started cracking long before the plates were set. I grew up in Bloomfield Hills, Michigan, where driveways curve like smiles and the lawns look trimmed by rulers. My father was the steady man in a neat tie at a local firm, the kind of neighbor who waved while measuring the grass. My mother worked part-time in scrubs and white sneakers, her voice soft as a waiting room even when it cut. We were a poster of four, a father, a mother, 2 daughters. People love the way that looks from the sidewalk. From the beginning, I learned to keep my hands busy and my head low. On Amanda's 8th birthday, a tiara arrived in a velvet box and a princess with a hired smile rang our doorbell. 2 years later on mine, my mother baked a sheet cake and told me to blow the candles out quickly before the frosting slid. "We already did the big party," once my father said, as if excess were a sin we'd repented for on my behalf. It became a rhythm. New clothes for Amanda at the start of each school year, while I tried not to tug the sleeves of her hand-me-downs. When I asked for new jeans in 7th grade, my mother kissed my cheek and said it was wasteful to replace what still held threads. That Saturday, she took Amanda shopping for confidence because the school play required it. I folded laundry, made dinner, and told myself that responsibility was its own kind of attention. By high school, I had perfected the art of being easy. I joined the debate team, brought home more trophies than dust, and learned to cook something different every week because having dinner ready at 6 made everyone calm. If I mentioned the way my father's eyes lifted when Amanda brought home a B+ and the way they didn't when I won state, it's only so you can see the picture without me framing it. "That's nice, honey," he said, already leaning toward Amanda's C- like it was a wound that needed bandaging. They said I was naturally responsible. They said Amanda needed support. They said these things kindly. When Amanda turned 16, a used Honda materialized in the driveway with a bow the size of a cat. I learned to drive in the quiet space between my responsibilities and borrowed my mother's car if I paid for gas. At 18, I left for Michigan State with scholarships and side jobs stitched together like a quilt. Amanda transferred twice, changed majors 3 times, and graduated a year late. The day I moved to Boston for a junior designer job, I hugged my parents on the porch while my sister scrolled her phone. My father told me to keep receipts. My mother told me not to get lonely. In Boston, I built a home the way I had built myself, piece by piece, with care. A comfortable gray sofa after my first promotion. A second-hand dining table I sanded smooth and stained walnut. A saucepan that didn't scorch the butter. There is a patience to purchasing what no one else will buy for you. Every item becomes a vote of confidence in your own future. I kept flying home, though, even when the flights were expensive and the conversations were not. I bought gifts with small paychecks and bigger hope. Books my father might read if they were within reach. A sleek coffee maker to replace the sputtering one. A television. Guest room furniture my mother admired in a catalog, but marked as impractical. I was trying to upgrade the house that had never fully held me, as if quality could seep into the walls and soften what lived there. So when my father said family vacation, I felt 12. Again, suddenly sure there might be a fair turn for me at last. He took a sip of coffee. My mother straightened the cake knife on the platter, as if alignment could make the sentence easier to hear. It's only enough for 3 tickets, my father said finally. Hotels, meals, activities, it adds up. We had to make a choice. Amanda tilted her phone so the case caught the light. She didn't look at me when she spoke. I really need a break, she said, her voice feather light. You know how hard it's been since Tyler moved? 3 months of dating had been elevated to devastation. I nodded, tasting metal behind my teeth. I work remote, I said, softer than I felt. I can pay my way, share your room, take my own meals if I have to. It's not just the ticket, my father repeated, and his gaze drifted toward Amanda like a compass that had already decided north. After dinner, I helped clear the plates because my hands didn't know what else to do. The dishwasher rattled. The living room television I'd bought reflected our shadows in a dark blank square. In the hallway, framed photos tracked our family's history. Amanda centered in almost every one. I looked for myself like people look for constellations. If you don't know where to start, you won't find them. I slept in the guest room I had furnished under a duvet I had chosen, staring at the ceiling fan I had installed the summer the air wouldn't move. At 2 a.m, the house went as quiet as a held breath. I slipped downstairs in my socks past the grandfather clock and the bowl where my mother keeps her keys. My father's office smelled like paper and cologne. The itinerary lay on the desk, printed on thick white stock that made the numbers look heavier. I did the math with a pencil because I wanted the LED to say aloud what my mouth could not. They could have afforded me. The cost of my presence was not the money, it was the habit. The next morning, Amanda met me in the kitchen, her sympathy arranged like place settings. I'm really sorry you can't come, she said, resting a hip against the counter. Maybe next time. She began describing swimsuits and sunsets and photos they would take my mother's hat, my father's smile, all 3 of them together, with water shining behind them. I held my coffee mug with both hands and told myself that ceramic cannot break if you don't put it down. Back in Boston, I tried to tell the story with dignity. My family's going to Hawaii without me, I said to a coworker, swiping my badge to enter the studio. Budget thing. She asked if I could pay my own way, and I said, it's complicated because the truth didn't have a place to stand without exposing everything. A group chat popped up on my phone created by Amanda for family fun. I wasn't removed from it. I was included as a witness. They debated restaurants, beaches, and the merits of helicopter tours. My mother sent a photo of 3 matching straw hats with blue ribbon bands. Family vacation gear, she wrote, and added a wink. My father called later. We'll bring you something nice, he offered, like a bandage offered after the cut has closed over poorly. Maybe a bracelet. That's not necessary, I said, and wiped a ring of condensation off my own kitchen counter with my palm. If they wanted me to feel included, they would have left a seat open. But inclusion in my family had always been the thing that arrived as a souvenir, cheap metal, polished to resemble gold. On Thursday, Amanda called and asked to borrow my camera. I want to take really good pictures of our family memories, she said the words, stacking neatly like a tower, built by someone who never expects the table to shake. "No," I said, and surprised us both. "I need it for work." There was a small clatter on her end, as if she'd set a spoon down too quickly. "Oh," she said, like a door had closed that she hadn't noticed was there. We ended the call without a fight. The quiet afterward felt like the first honest thing we'd shared in years. The night before their flight, I stayed late at the office. The city washed itself in the glow of tail lights and windows, and I rode the train home with people whose lives I didn't know but respected. In my apartment, I turned off the lights and stood by the window as the street lamp made a pale coin on the sidewalk. I could see my reflection in the glass, just a woman in her own place, not a daughter, not a shadow. In the morning, my father checked in from the airport lounge, as if it were a civic duty to mark the beginning of joy. "Beginning our adventure," he wrote. I made coffee, slowly listening to the soft pour and the gentle click of the mug on the counter. The apartment smelled like home. Someone in the alley dragged recycling bins past a fence. A bus sighed to a stop. Somewhere a boarding call announced my family's gate like a blessing. When the photos began, they came fast. My mother and sister in matching hats. My father holding a plastic cup of something meant to taste like pineapple. Their silhouettes against a window of tropical light. Beneath one post, Amanda wrote, "So blessed to have the most amazing family vacation, nothing better than time with the people who matter most." I watched the words sit there clean and accurate as a medical chart. I set my phone face down and went to the sink. The water ran harder than I needed. I stood with both hands braced on the counter, my shoulders tight, as if I were holding up something that had fallen on me and been mistaken for duty. The refrigerator hummed. The clock on the stove blinked a minute I didn't see. Somewhere inside the cage of my ribs, a slow complaint began to wake the sound a trapped animal makes before it understands the shape of the door. I dried my hands on a dish towel and walked to the gray sofa I'd chosen when no one else cared which color would make me feel calm. I sat and listened to the apartment breathe. The light shifted a shade across the rug. A siren rose and fell far away. The camera on the shelf seemed to watch me like a witness who could not testify. A plane crossed the sky I couldn't see, carrying 3 people who would land and rent a car and pose with the waterfall. They would eat something grilled on a beach while the sun washed out their edges. They would sleep well. The porch light in Michigan would buzz against moths that had learned to love a glow that never opens the door. I reached for my journal and felt the weight of it soft with years of entries where the pen always bent toward hope. I opened to a blank page, the paper still smelling faintly of the store where I'd bought it. My hand hovered. The first word would matter. The sound in my chest grew quieter, as if waiting. The phone flipped face down, blinked a notification beneath its black glass. I didn't turn it over. Outside rain tapped the window with a persistence that did not ask permission. I set the pen to the page and let the line meet the white. And for the first time in a long time, I did not look for an answer from the house I had left behind. I listened to the room I had built with my own hands, and I listened to the silence that followed their departure. And I realized it was speaking. The words were simple and heavy. They would change everything. The night after their plane left, I came home from work to a quiet apartment that no longer felt like a refuge. The city outside my window glowed in streaks of amber and white, and for the first time in years, the silence didn't comfort me. It pressed. The hum of the refrigerator, the ticking wall clock, even the faint rush of traffic below it all sounded like reminders that I was alone. I made a simple dinner, something I could barely taste, and sat on the sofa staring at the muted reflection of myself in the black TV screen. My phone lay beside me, lighting up every few minutes with new photos from Hawaii. My family smiled in each one Amanda's head on Mom's shoulder, Dad's arm around them, both their faces shining under tropical light. I tried not to look, but curiosity betrayed me. The captions spoke like a family memoir written by someone else. "So lucky to have these two," my sister wrote. Another post read, "No one loves you like family." The words sliced quietly, not because they were cruel, but because they were true, at least for them. I closed the phone, pressed it face down on the table, and felt a wave rise that I didn't have the strength to swallow. Tears came without warning. Not delicate ones, but raw, choking sobs that left me breathless. They came for the child who had baked her own birthday cupcakes, for the teenager who clapped hardest for her sister's awards, for the adult who still believed she could earn a seat at that table. I cried until there was nothing left to cry for, and in that emptied space, a strange calm settled. The next morning, sunlight came through the blinds in thin stripes across the wall. I made coffee and called Tara. She answered from Seattle, her voice soft with concern. I told her everything: the dinner, the excuses, the photos. She listened without interrupting, then said quietly, "Rach, that's not just favoritism. That's emotional abuse." Her words stopped me cold. "Abuse," I whispered. "They never hit me. They never yelled." "That's the thing," she said. "You've been conditioned to believe love has to be earned. That's not love, it's control. You've been their caretaker, not their daughter." I said nothing, just watched the coffee swirl in my mug, the surface trembling slightly in my hands. "You deserve more than this," Tara added gently. "You deserve to feel chosen." After the call, I sat at my kitchen table, staring at the wall, until the clock ticked me into decision. I found the number for a therapist that my company's insurance covered. Her name was Dr. Leanne Holbrook. The receptionist scheduled me for Thursday afternoon. When the day came, I almost canceled. Part of me still believed therapy was for people with louder problems. But something about the stillness in that waiting room, the sound of a fountain, the faint smell of lavender, made it easier to stay. Dr. Holbrook was in her 50s, with silver hair cut short and eyes that seemed to read what you hadn't yet said. I told her the story in careful order, keeping my voice even, as if neatness could make it less painful. She listened without taking many notes. When I finished, she said, "What you're describing is a classic family dynamic. Your sister is the golden child rewarded for existing. You're the scapegoat, valued only for what you give." I frowned, unsure if labeling it made it better or worse. "But they're my family," I said. "They love me in their way." She nodded slowly. Love and harm can coexist. But when harm keeps repeating, it stops being love in practice. What you've endured is emotional neglect. You've been invisible in your own home for so long that you learn to shrink. The words hit deeper than I expected. She leaned forward slightly. "You can't change them, Rachel. But you can change what you accept. That starts with boundaries." That word boundaries felt foreign in my mouth, as if it belonged to people braver than me. But I carried it home like a stone in my pocket, something solid to hold when doubt tried to pull me back. Over the next few weeks, while my family posted sunsets and snorkeling photos, I began to keep a different kind of record. I opened an old notebook and started listing things: every gift I'd bought for the house, every flight I'd taken home, every time I'd rearranged my schedule for their convenience. The list stretched longer than I expected. Beside it, I wrote memories that still ached: the year they missed my art show, the graduation they left early, the phone calls that ended when Amanda needed something. At first, writing it down made me angry. Then it made me tired. Eventually, it made me clear. One evening, while sorting through old boxes in my closet, I found my high school journals, pages and pages of a younger version of me trying to understand why good behavior earned so little warmth. One entry read, Mom said I shouldn't wear new glasses to prom when my old ones are fine. But Amanda got contacts last week because she wants to look her best. The hurt in that sentence felt familiar, but the voice behind it sounded like someone I wanted to protect. That night, I sat on my couch surrounded by open notebooks and loose papers, the city lights flickering across them like quiet witnesses. I realized I'd spent my whole life waiting for my family to see me, when all along I'd been documenting proof that they never did. The following morning, I met with Dr. Holbrook again. "You've been surviving on hope," she said after I told her about the journals. "Hope is beautiful, but it can also be a trap if it keeps you in pain." "What am I supposed to do?" I asked. She smiled faintly. "Imagine your life without waiting for them. What does that look like?" I thought of the gray sofa, the art prints I'd chosen, the plants I kept alive. I thought of quiet mornings with my own music, my own plans. "It looks peaceful," I said. "Then maybe that's where you start," she said. That night, I walked through my apartment as if seeing it for the first time. Every object had a story, a pot bought after my first bonus, a framed photo from a local artist, a rug chosen because it reminded me of lake water. Everything in that space existed because I had made it so. The realization was gentle but powerful. I already knew how to build a home. I just needed to stop apologizing for living in it alone. When the first postcard from Hawaii arrived a week later, I didn't feel anger, just distance. A glossy photo of palm trees with my mother's handwriting on the back. "Wish you were here? We'll bring souvenirs." I placed it in a drawer, not as a keepsake, but as a marker the last time I'd let them define what family meant. 2 days later, I booked a session with Dr. Holbrook and said, "I think I need to make a change." "What kind of change?" she asked. "The kind that lets me breathe." We talked about logistics, how to prepare emotionally, what support I had. She reminded me that boundaries aren't walls, just doors with locks you control. By the end of that session, I knew what I was going to do, even if I wasn't ready to say it out loud. That weekend, I made coffee and opened my laptop. The cursor blinked like a heartbeat as I started researching places to live, cities far enough away to start over, close enough to remain real. My eyes kept drifting toward Seattle, the city where Tara lived. I remembered her telling me once that it smelled like rain and opportunity. I didn't make any decisions that night. I just saved a few listings. But something shifted. I slept better than I had in months. The next morning, I woke to messages from Amanda about their return flight. She wanted to know if I could drive to the airport to help with bags. I stared at the text for a long time, then set the phone down without answering. A quiet refusal felt like its own beginning. At work, my boss stopped by my desk. "You've been focused lately," she said. "Your designs have a new energy." I smiled, realizing she was right. The same intensity that once went into proving my worth to my family was now pouring into something that gave back. That night, I wrote a question at the top of a clean journal page. What would it look like to choose myself first? I didn't have the full answer, but ideas came in small flashes: space, distance, stillness. Later, I called Tara again. When she answered, I could hear the soft sound of rain through her window. "You ever think about moving?" I asked. "Every time it snows in Michigan," she laughed. "Why?" "Just curious," I said. "Seattle seems peaceful." "It is," she said. "If you ever want a fresh start, I've got a guest room and a list of coffee shops that will love you." Her words lingered long after the call ended. Days passed. The houseplants in my apartment grew wild, leaning toward the light. The notebooks on my table filled with plans, budgets, logistics, what I'd take if I left. Each small step steadied me. My family's messages grew quieter as their trip ended, replaced by short notes about delayed flights and tan lines. On their last day, Amanda posted one more photo of the three of them on a beach at sunset. The caption read, "No place like home, except maybe here." I studied the photo until it blurred. Then I closed my laptop and whispered, "Home isn't a place that forgets you." The following morning, I walked through my apartment with a calm I couldn't explain. I stood at the window, the early light painting the floor gold, and realized I wasn't angry anymore. Just done. The longing had burned itself out, leaving space for something new. I spent the afternoon sorting drawers, making lists, deciding what to keep and what to let go. The act of clearing space felt almost sacred. Every box I packed seemed to whisper the same truth: this isn't escape, it's return. By evening, I'd made up my mind. The rain began again, soft against the glass. I brewed one last cup of coffee and sat by the window. I didn't know yet how to tell them or when. I only knew that when they came back from paradise, I wouldn't be waiting in the same place they'd left me. Somewhere between the steady beat of rain and the city's distant hum, a sense of quiet certainty took shape. I could feel the ground shifting beneath me, not with fear, but with freedom. The morning light slid through the blinds in quiet bands across my floor. I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee gone cold, watching the steam fade from its surface. The rain from the night before had left the streets dark and shining, and somewhere down the block, someone was scraping ice from a windshield. That small, steady sound felt almost comforting. Everything in me was ready for motion, even if I didn't yet know what that motion would look like. I opened my notebook, the one I'd been filling with lists and questions, and read the last line I'd written. What would it look like to choose myself first? The words didn't frighten me anymore. They felt like permission. I picked up my pen and wrote beneath them. It would look like leaving. I didn't write it twice. I didn't need to. That afternoon, I sat across from my boss, Jane Morris, in her glass-walled office overlooking Boylston Street. She was a woman who valued precision and calm, the kind of leader who noticed everything but never made you nervous. "You've been doing incredible work lately," she said, glancing up from her computer. "You seem lighter somehow." "I think I'm finally ready for a change," I told her. "I want to accept the remote work option. I'd like to relocate to Seattle." Her eyebrows rose, not with surprise, but with interest. "Seattle? That's quite a move." "I know," I said, and smiled faintly. "But I'm ready for it. I can handle the time difference, and I'll be available for every client call. I'll even come back quarterly for in-person meetings." Jane nodded, folding her hands. "I don't want to lose you, Rachel. If distance is what you need, let's make it work." We spent an hour going over logistics contracts, schedule adjustments, a modest salary increase for cost of living. When I left her office, the decision already felt real. The streets outside looked the same, but the air had changed. It was like exhaling after holding my breath for years. That evening, I called Tara. The phone barely rang before she picked up. "You're doing it, aren't you?" she said, half laughing, half crying. "I am," I told her. 2 weeks. I'm coming to Seattle." She promised to have her guest room ready and texted me a list of neighborhoods, each one described with a line of affection. Capitol Hill trees and bookstores, Ballard Good Farmers Market, Green Lake walks at sunset. Her messages read like postcards from the future. Over the next few days, I packed my life into boxes labeled Keep Sell or Start Fresh. Each time I filled one, I felt the faint release of something I'd carried too long. I sold the large furniture, listed my sofa online, and arranged for movers to handle the rest. When the apartment echoed, I knew I was almost ready. The harder part was Michigan. In my notebook, I made a detailed list of every item I had ever purchased for my parents' house things that now felt like fragments of my effort to belong. The television I'd bought when my father complained about the old one's picture quality, the coffee maker that replaced the broken one, the guest room set I had paid for piece by piece, even the lawnmower I'd gifted for Father's Day. Each entry was proof of how I had built comfort for others while going without it myself. I called a moving company that specialized in long-distance relocation. A woman named Brenda answered, her tone brisk but kind. "We can pick up from the Michigan address, pack the items, and deliver them to a Seattle storage facility," she said. "I'll need it done before my parents return from vacation," I explained. "That can be arranged," she said. "Just send the inventory list and proof of ownership." When I hung up, I felt something settle, a quiet certainty that I was reclaiming what was mine. Over the next week, I lived inside my plan. Work during the day, phone calls in the evening, packing at night. Each task was small, but carried meaning. For the first time, my focus wasn't on what I could do for others, but on what I could build for myself. On the night before the movers were due at my parents' house, I sat in my nearly empty apartment, surrounded by taped boxes. The air smelled faintly of cardboard and lemon cleaner. I took out a sheet of stationery and began writing the letter I'd been rehearsing in my head for days. "Dear Mom, Dad, and Amanda, by the time you read this, I'll be gone. I've moved to Seattle to begin a new chapter of my life." I wrote carefully, not with anger, but with clarity. I told them what years of imbalance had done, how it had shaped me, and why I couldn't continue pretending everything was fine. I wrote that I loved them, but love wasn't supposed to feel like absence. I explained which items I had taken, all of which I had bought myself, and that I hoped someday we could rebuild something healthier. It took 7 drafts to find the right tone, firm, not cruel. Final, but not vengeful. When I signed my name, my hand shook just a little. I sent a copy of the inventory list to the movers, along with access instructions to the hidden key under the back porch rock. It felt strange to share that family secret with strangers, but stranger still that I felt no guilt. They were professionals doing their job. I was simply doing mine, collecting the pieces of my life. The next morning, I woke early, brewed one last pot of coffee in Boston, and stood by the window while the city stretched awake. The air outside was pale and cold, the kind that sharpens your thoughts. The movers arrived right on time, a team of 3 women who greeted me with cheerful efficiency. "Most of our clients have more furniture than this one of them," joked gently. "I'm traveling light," I said, smiling. "New start." They worked quickly, wrapping each box with care. By noon, the apartment stood empty, except for a small duffel bag by the door. I ran my hand along the kitchen counter, the place where I'd made soup on nights I couldn't sleep, and whispered a quiet thank you. It felt right to leave gratitude behind. My landlord came by to collect the keys. I handed him an envelope with an extra month's rent and a short note thanking him for his patience. He looked surprised, then smiled softly. "You were one of the good ones," he said. Outside, the winter air was sharp enough to sting. Mrs. Abernathy, my elderly neighbor, was walking her small terrier down the hall. She stopped when she saw the suitcases. "You're not moving out, are you, dear?" "I am," I said, heading west. "Oh my, the building won't be the same without you." Her words caught me off guard. Genuine, simple, uncalculated. I smiled. "That means more than you know." The ride to the airport was long enough for reflection, but short enough that I didn't turn back. As the driver loaded my bags, the city passed by in quiet motion, brick buildings, bare trees, early commuters. Boston had been the place where I proved I could stand alone. It was time to see what came after standing. In Chicago, I had a layover long enough for coffee and a video call with Tara. Her face appeared on the screen, framed by warm light and houseplants. "The mover's finished," she said, glancing at her phone. "Everything's on its way to Seattle." I took a deep breath and smiled. "Then I guess I really did it." "You really did," she said. "How do you feel?" "Lighter," I said. Like I finally set something down. The second flight felt longer than the first, but when the plane began its descent, the clouds broke into a wash of silver and blue. Below Seattle, spread out like a promised green hills, water winding between them, mountains standing watch in the distance. Tara met me at arrivals. She was waving before I even cleared the gate, her smile wide enough to fill every empty space I'd carried. When she hugged me, I felt the tension drain from my shoulders, as if I'd been holding it since childhood. "Welcome home," she whispered. Her apartment in Ballard smelled of cinnamon and fresh coffee. She had put flowers on the nightstand in the guest room and left a small basket filled with local treats, simple kindnesses that felt extravagant after years of polite indifference. That night, we sat on her balcony with glasses of wine, watching the sky fade to violet over Puget Sound. The air carried the scent of salt and pine. Tara leaned back in her chair, eyes half closed. "Tomorrow's going to be rough," she said softly. "They'll be home. They'll see the letter." I nodded. "I know, but for the first time, their reaction isn't my responsibility." We sat in silence after that, listening to the water and the faint sound of gulls. The peace in that moment felt fragile, but real. The next morning, I woke before sunrise. For a few seconds, I didn't recognize where I was. Then I saw the soft blue walls, the flowers, and remembered. I brewed coffee and stood by the window while the mist lifted from the street below. My phone was still silent, but I knew that wouldn't last. By noon, it started text messages, voicemails, social media notifications, all arriving in waves. "What did you do from Amanda? Call us right now from Mom." "Rachel, this isn't funny from Dad." I sat at the small kitchen table reading each one until they blurred together. When the phone finally stopped buzzing, I typed a single message in the family group chat. I took only what I purchased. My reasons are in the letter. Please respect my need for space. Then I set the phone aside and turned back to my coffee. Outside, a gull swooped low over the water, catching the wind and rising again. The air smelled of rain and freedom. For the first time in years, I didn't feel invisible. I felt seen by myself. That evening, Tara and I walked to a small restaurant down the street. The windows were fogged from warmth, and the owner greeted us like old friends. As we sat at a corner table, I realized that nothing about this new life was glamorous. It was simple, and maybe that was what I'd been searching for all along, a life built not from trying to prove I mattered, but from knowing I did. When we walked back home, the city lights shimmered through the drizzle. Tara slipped her arm through mine. "You okay?" she asked. I smiled. Better than okay. But when I reached for my phone later that night, a new message had appeared from an unknown number. It was Amanda. "I get it now. I never realized how much you gave. I'm sorry." I sat for a long time staring at the words. They didn't erase anything, but they cracked something open, a small space where healing could breathe. The rain started again, soft and steady against the glass. I closed my eyes and listened. The sound was nothing like the silence I'd known before. It didn't press or accuse. It simply existed like peace learning how to speak. The rain lifted the next morning, leaving the city washed clean. From Tara's balcony, the rooftops glimmered under a soft layer of mist. The calm looked almost intentional, like the world was giving me time to breathe before the next wave came. I stood with a mug of coffee in both hands, steam rising into the cool air, and tried not to think about what was waiting on my phone. By afternoon, I couldn't avoid it any longer. The messages had multiplied overnight, missed calls, voicemails, even an email from my father's work account with the subject line, "Call home now." I sat at the kitchen table scrolling through them in silence. My father's voice in the recordings was rough and sharp, as if control itself had slipped through his fingers. "You can't just take things from our house," he barked in one. My mother's voice followed in another, thin and tearful. "We don't understand, sweetheart. Please call. Just talk to us." Then came Amanda, more restrained but edged with disbelief. "Mom and Dad are losing it." "What did you do?" I didn't answer. Not right away. I turned off the phone, made myself lunch, and worked through the afternoon until the sky dimmed toward evening. Only then, when the silence grew heavy again, did I open the family group chat and type a single sentence. I took only what I purchased. My reasons are in the letter. Please respect my need for space. I read it once before pressing send. The moment it delivered, I felt the tension break in my chest, like a knot finally untangling. Later that evening, I joined Tara for dinner at a small bistro tucked between brick buildings near the water. Candlelight flickered off the glass windows and the smell of roasted garlic drifted from the kitchen. She listened as I described the messages, her expression steady the way a lighthouse holds still through a storm. "They'll fight it," she said softly. "Then they'll deflect. And after that, maybe they'll start to see what you meant." "I don't know if I want them to," I admitted. "Not yet. Then don't rush it," she said. Healing doesn't follow anyone's schedule. The following morning, I woke early and joined my design team's video call from the small desk by her living room window. The familiarity of work steadied me. For the first time in years, I felt what it meant to belong to something I had built, not something I was born into. When the meeting ended, I looked out across the city and realized I wasn't homesick. I was home. That peace lasted until noon when my phone buzzed again. My father had left a new voicemail. His voice was quieter this time, almost measured. "Rachel," he said, "we need to talk. This isn't right. You're still our daughter, and we deserve an explanation." The word "deserve" tightened something inside me. I deleted the message and opened a new notebook page instead. At the top, I wrote, "Their expectations are not my obligations." That night, I met with Dr. Holbrook over video. She smiled when I told her I'd arrived safely and that the movers had delivered my things to a Seattle storage facility. "You've taken a courageous step," she said. "But now comes the harder part, sitting with what freedom feels like." "It feels strange," I admitted. "Almost too quiet." "Quiet isn't absence," she said. "It's space. Let it stay open." I took her advice literally. Over the next few days, I let quiet fill the edges of everything. I walked through neighborhoods that smelled of cedar and rain. I found a small coffee shop with a view of the mountains and a barista who learned my name by the second morning. I began to imagine what life here could become, a routine built not around waiting for a phone call, but around simple moments that belonged entirely to me. By the end of the week, the tone of my family's messages began to change. The anger dulled to confusion. Confusion softened into apology attempts. My father wrote, "You could have just talked to us." My mother sent, "We never meant to make you feel less important." Amanda surprisingly wrote the only message that felt honest. "I get it now. I never realized how much you gave. I'm sorry." I stared at her text for a long time before replying. "Thank you," I wrote. "That means more than you think." The next few weeks settled into something close to normal. My boxes arrived from storage and Tara helped me move them into my new apartment on Capitol Hill. The space was small, but bright, large windows, pale wooden floors, a balcony just wide enough for 2 chairs. As we unpacked, we found quiet laughter between memories. When she left that night, I stood among the half-open boxes and felt an odd mix of pride and disbelief. For the first time, the room around me reflected only me. 3 days later, I was sitting at my desk when my father's name appeared on the phone again. I almost ignored it, but curiosity won. His voice was low and strained. "We need to talk about this," he said. "I think your letter was exaggerated." "We didn't mean for things to feel that way." "Dad," I said calmly, "my letter wasn't about feelings. It was about patterns. You can deny how it looked, but not what it was." A long silence followed. I could hear his breathing on the other end, slow and uneven. "We love you, Rachel. We just want things back the way they were." "I don't," I said. "The way they were is why I left." He sighed, a sound that seemed heavier than words, and ended the call without goodbye. I sat still for a while, listening to the rain hit the balcony railing, and realized I didn't feel guilt, only relief. The next message came from my mother, a letter delivered through the mail a week later. Her handwriting was familiar, looping, and tidy. She'd tucked photos inside family Christmases, birthdays, moments I remembered mostly for the silence that sat between us. Her words were full of longing, but not reflection. "We miss you," she wrote. "This family isn't complete without you." I folded the letter carefully and placed it in a drawer. Love was there, yes, but still tangled in denial. Amanda, though, was different. She started reaching out slowly, small messages at first, then longer ones. "Found my high school diary," she wrote one evening. "It's hard reading how I used to talk about you. I'm sorry for the way I treated you." Another time, looking at old photos. "You were always on the edge. I never saw it before." Her honesty felt like a door cracked open. I responded when I could, not rushing but not retreating either. I wanted to see if change could live in small gestures, not grand apologies. By early spring, my life in Seattle had found its rhythm. Work was going well. My team thrived with the new setup. On weekends, Tara and I explored farmers markets or drove out to the coast. The ocean here was different from the Atlantic, colder, rougher, but beautiful in its honesty. I found comfort in its constancy. One afternoon in late March, my phone rang again. It was my father, but this time, his voice carried something unfamiliar: humility. "I spoke with the neighbor today," he said. "He asked where you'd gone. I told him we'd made mistakes, that we hadn't been fair to you." He paused as if letting the admission breathe. It was hard to say out loud, but it's true. For a long time, I didn't speak. The sound of those words, "we hadn't been fair," felt like the first genuine crack in the wall. "Thank you for saying that," I said quietly. "It matters." We ended the call on a rare note of calm. I sat by the window afterward, watching the light shift over the city. For the first time since leaving, I felt something close to forgiveness, not for what they had done, but for what they were trying to learn. Weeks passed. The anger from Michigan softened into distance. Calls came less frequently, but carried more thought. My mother's tone lost its defensiveness. My father began asking about my work instead of demanding updates on my personal life. Amanda even sent photos of the house, newly arranged with what remained after I'd taken my things. "It looks emptier," she wrote, "but maybe that's what we needed to see what we took for granted." When spring turned to early summer, I realized how much I'd changed too. I was no longer measuring healing by their behavior. I was building it through mine. One evening, I sat on my balcony with a glass of wine, the sun dipping low behind the mountains. The city hummed below, soft and distant. I thought about the woman who had packed her life into boxes and walked away. She hadn't disappeared. She had simply stepped into view. As the air cooled, I received one last message that night from my mother. "Your father and I are starting family therapy," she wrote. "If you ever want to join, you're welcome. No pressure." I didn't answer right away. I closed my phone, leaned back in the chair, and listened to the wind rustle through the nearby trees. It didn't feel like a demand this time. It felt like an opening. The first stars began to appear faint but steady. Somewhere in the distance, a train whistle echoed through the city. I breathed in the cool night air and felt something I hadn't felt in years, hope unburdened and quiet. It didn't ask for promises. It simply waited to see what might grow next. The first time I saw my parents again, spring had just broken open over Seattle. The air smelled faintly of rain and cherry blossoms, and the city's hills shimmered with soft green after weeks of gray. I had invited them for a short visit 2 nights in a downtown hotel, a weekend of cautious steps towards something that might one day resemble peace. When their taxi pulled up, I stood outside the lobby, my hands folded loosely at my waist. My father stepped out first, slower than I remembered. He looked smaller somehow, his shoulders less certain, his voice gentler when he said my name. My mother followed, clutching her purse with both hands, eyes searching my face as if for permission to smile. "Hi, Mom." "Hi, Dad," I said quietly. For a moment, no one moved. Then my mother reached for me, hesitating only until I nodded. Her hug was brief, but real. My father's came after awkward and careful, as if he feared breaking something invisible between us. We walked along the waterfront that afternoon, speaking in fragments that carried more truth than I'd expected. My father asked about my work, about the city's weather, about whether I'd found good coffee. My mother listened more than she spoke, her sentences halting, her tone stripped of its old defensiveness. When we reached a bench overlooking the Sound, the clouds began to pull apart, and sunlight spread across the water. My mother sighed softly. "I see why you like it here," she said. "It's peaceful," I replied. "I needed that." She nodded, her eyes glistening. "We're learning about that too," she said, almost a whisper. Peace. Boundaries. In therapy, they keep saying those two things go together. I turned toward her, the wind lifting a strand of her hair. "They do," I said. "You can't have one without the other." The rest of the day unfolded gently like a photograph, slowly developing. We visited Pike Place Market, shared bowls of chowder, and walked through the narrow aisles of local shops. Every conversation felt fragile, as if we were threading something back together with finer thread this time. That night, we said goodbye in front of their hotel. My father lingered on the sidewalk. "You've built something beautiful here," he said, his voice rough but steady. "All on your own." "Not entirely," I told him. "I've had help. Good people." He nodded. "Still, I'm proud of you." The next morning, before their flight, my mother slipped a note under my door. It wasn't long, just a few lines in her familiar cursive. "We're trying to do better. Thank you for letting us come." It ended simply, "I miss you, but I understand." I read it twice, then folded it carefully into the back of my journal. Some words don't need replies. They just need time to grow roots. In the months that followed, communication found its rhythm. Short calls, on weekends video chats that didn't circle back to old pain. My father shared updates about his work and their therapy sessions. My mother asked about the plants on my balcony and the friends I'd made. Amanda called more often than either of them, usually at night after her shift at a new job in marketing. She'd started therapy too, and it showed in her voice, softer, clearer, unguarded in a way I'd never heard. "I've been thinking a lot about how we grew up," she said one evening. how Mom and Dad made me the center of everything, and how that hurt both of us in different ways. I leaned back in my chair, listening to the hum of the refrigerator and the steady rain outside. I think we were both doing what we were taught, I said. Now we get to choose something better. There was a pause, then a quiet laugh. Better, she said. I like that word. Summer arrived slowly, spilling sunlight into every corner of my apartment. My work flourished, my team expanding across states and time zones. Tara and I started hosting small dinners for friends, artists, teachers, neighbors, who had become like family. The evenings stretched long with laughter and music, and sometimes, in quieter moments, I caught myself watching the light play across the faces around my table. It struck me then that this was what belonging really felt like, steady shared and earned through kindness. On a warm August morning, I joined Dr. Holbrook for our final session. She smiled through the screen. You've done the hardest part, she said. You stopped needing their approval to feel worthy. I thought about it, then nodded. I think I just stopped mistaking love for obligation. Exactly, she said. Peace isn't about fixing the past. It's about living without letting it run you. When we ended the call, I closed my laptop and sat in silence for a long time. The air in the apartment was still the faint sound of gulls drifting through the open window. For the first time in my life, the quiet didn't feel empty. It felt full. By late fall, the rhythm of life had settled into something soft and certain. My parents continued therapy and began volunteering together at a local food pantry. Amanda had saved enough to move into her own apartment, proudly sending photos of the modest space she furnished herself. When she called that night, her voice carried that same warmth I'd once thought only other families shared. It's small, she said, but it's mine. I smiled. That's exactly how it's supposed to feel. In early winter, I visited Michigan for a short weekend, the first since everything changed. The flight landed in soft snow, and the world outside the airport glowed in muted light. My father picked me up quietly, his hands steady on the wheel. The drive home passed with easy conversation about roads and weather, small things that now felt like progress. When we reached the house, the porch light flickered on. My mother stood in the doorway, bundled in a sweater. I didn't recognize her face, lined but kind. The air inside smelled of cinnamon and pine. Some furniture was new. Other things remained familiar. The space no longer felt like a museum of our family's hierarchy. It felt like a home learning to breathe again. Dinner was simple. Conversation drifted between past and present without falling apart. At one point, my mother reached for my hand across the table. You were right, she said. About everything. We didn't see what we were doing. I'm so sorry it took losing you to learn. I looked down at her hand, soft and trembling, and gave it a gentle squeeze. I'm glad you're learning now, I said. That's what matters. When the weekend ended, I hugged them both on the porch. Snow fell in slow, deliberate flakes, catching the glow of the porch light. My father's eyes glistened as he said, You know you'll always have a home here. I smiled. I do, but I finally have one of my own too. On the flight back to Seattle, I watched the clouds turn pink above the horizon, the kind of light that never looks the same twice. Below, the world stretched wide and forgiving. By the time we landed, night had settled, and the city lights shimmered like small, patient stars. At home, I opened the balcony door and stepped into the cool air. The rain had started again, soft against the railing, steady as breathing. Inside, my apartment glowed warm and lived in. My life felt whole, not because everything was mended, but because I had learned to stop waiting for it to be. I poured a cup of tea and sat by the window, watching droplets trace down the glass. For a long time, I didn't think about the past, or the hurt, or even the healing. I just listened. Somewhere between the hum of the city and the rhythm of the rain, I realized that peace doesn't arrive like a revelation. It grows quietly, like light finding its way through clouds. And once it does, you start to see everything differently, even yourself. If this story touched something in you, tell me where you're listening from down in the comments. I'd love to know. And if you've ever had to choose peace over approval, share this story with someone who'll understand. Remember, sometimes the bravest thing we can do is finally build a life that feels like our own.